Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Culpeper Chamber of Commerce Town Hall on hiring and interviewing with Neil Mairs from Germanna Community College. This is the fourth in a series of 5 that we've been conducting with Neil, and we're happy to have him back again. This town hall is brought to you by the Culpeper Star Exponent. Neil Mairs is currently an associate professor of business at Germanna Community College. He's the lead marketing faculty for the institution and is also the chairman of business peer group for the Virginia Community College system. Neil has taught courses in human resources, finance, and supervision at Germanna and has been at Germanna since 2010. In addition, Neil is the president of the Solutions Recruiting, an HR consulting and executive search firm he founded in 2001. He works primarily with major industrial service corporations throughout the U.S., helping them optimize their hiring processes and fill high-level and specialized positions. His prior experience includes serving as vice president of sales for RUS, a $300 million industrial services company formerly based in Culpeper, along with extensive experience with Fortune 500 companies prior. He has also been a speaker for multiple national and local programs on the subject of hiring and recruiting. Neil holds a master's degree in business from the University of Rochester, New York, and is certified in the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator System. Neil currently serves on the board of directors for Hospice of the Piedmont and is a former board president with 15 years of service. Neil, thank you for joining us again today. We look forward to hearing from you. What are you seeing with hiring and interviewing coming out of this COVID-19 crisis? How is it affecting, and how are people adapting to the situation?
I think, and that's a great question, Jeff. I think what we're seeing is a lot of good things happening. There's a lot of lines that are blurring now between face-to-face and virtual. And I think people are getting much more. A lot of businesses are coming to realize, you know what, people can work virtually and be very productive. So what I think you're seeing is a lot of the line that's going to carry over. I know for Germanna, it's carrying over in education, that we're very concerned about making sure that we offer live and synchronous and live virtual classes and online classes, et cetera. So we're seeing those lines blur. So what I think is happening is, first of all, we're all getting better at that type of process. Secondly, what's going to happen is as the economy improves, and it is steadily, if you look at the stock market, you're going to see that the need for hiring is going to continue to go up. Now, a lot of industries are seeing stops and starts, but eventually at some point the doors are going to open back up. And when that happens, clearly people are going to need to be in a much more aggressive hiring mode. So what I'm going to do today is, and I'm going to share my screen here in just a second, and I'm going to talk some more about the next step in the process that we started talking about, and that is, that is the selection and hiring process. Now, what we originally talked about was we laid out a 5-step process for people in our community to think of when they're getting ready to hire somebody. We started with job design. Last time we talked about marketing the job. Today we're going to talk about the selection process. You've done several things to kind of get the word out there. You've got an array of candidates, and how do you kind of sift through that process and hire the right person most effectively and efficiently? So as I said, so far we've really talked about in these first first couple of presentations. One is how to establish a target. Here's what it is our organization really needs to hire a new employee. Last time we talked about how do you then, once you have that, how do you cast the net wide? How do you make sure you increase your odds of success by having a lot of choices to choose from? We're at the point today where if you've done that right, you're now sitting there staring at a large pile of resumes or applicants. And while that is a good situation to be in. And typically, if you post a job online, you're going to get, depending on the situation, you could get hundreds of responses for it. Particularly in an environment right now where we've got, unemployment is getting better. We're still, to keep for perspective, even after a couple of months of improvement, we are still 15% over its peak in 2009. So we've got a long way to go before that gets better. So there's going to be a lot of people looking for work. How do you get from that point where you're staring at this big pile of resumes to where you're hiring that next superstar that you need? So we're going to talk about a couple of things. One is, how do you do this? How do you create a process, first of all, that is organized and efficient? Meaning you want to be able to get through everything, but you won't be able to do it if you've got too much or just big piles. So how do you make it organized and efficient? But also, how do you take a broad enough perspective on the candidates that you're talking to be able to make a meaningful decision. We're all going to have questions on people that we hire. And the key is who can fill in the picture as you want to fill in that picture as best possible. Now, here's the way in terms of painting, the way I describe the interview process or this phase of the process, it's like painting a picture. Like when you start, you've got an idea in mind of what the ideal candidate's going to look like. You've got a picture of success. So you've looked at what you need. You've talked to people internally, got a good picture. You want to take this next part of the process in phases, where in each step of the process, you are uncovering information and data that's going to help continue to give you a ever clearer picture of those candidates that you're talking to be able to assess, do they truly fit it? And by the end of the interview process, you're never going to be at complete clarity. You can't be until they've worked for you for a period of time. But you want to be able to fill in enough pieces of that puzzle to know that this candidate that I'm talking to is going to fit that picture of success. And really, what you're looking for to a large degree is patterns of behavior. You want to see in terms of past actions and things that they're doing now. You want to be able to see the patterns and connect them as best you can. And it's easier than you think. And I'm going to show you that in a few minutes. And then secondly, you want to be able to quantify your gut. Gut instinct, I think, is a powerful thing that's correct, but you need to be able to quantify it. And lastly, you don't want to be overwhelmed by beauty. And I know I certainly have that problem, being as beautiful as I am. The problem with that can be overwhelming to people. So you don't want to be overwhelmed by the person that's a beautiful interviewer. You want to make sure that you're getting all the right information from them that you need to make a longer term picture of success. Now, look at the situation you're in. Okay, so we've now got 3 to 5 candidates. We've got the situation where we've now got a group of candidates. So we're going to say the goal for the interview process is to connect and communicate with them. Paint as broad a picture as possible as who they are. And really what you're doing is you're establishing a picture of today, a relationship for people that you're going to use either today or tomorrow. So we're going to talk about interviewing, and that's where we're going to get into how to get examples of past performance and to see how they think on their feet. The desired outcome, to have that broader perspective. We're going to talk about process and integration, and that's a big part of this. How do you put together the right system? And you're going to want to use multiple people and multiple steps in this, but you got to do that efficiently. You don't have lots and lots of time in order to broaden it as much as possible and use multiple data sources to make sure that you're bringing in. You can see, as I said, it's about patterns and flags, and you want to be able to connect those pictures. Now, the trap that you have to avoid, and everybody has a tendency to do this, I know I do too if I don't continue to remind myself, is to not think that I am good at coming in and in a short period of time making the right decision on somebody. You're not. My favorite author, Malcolm Gladwell, read a great book recently, Talking to Strangers, where he discusses this. And what he does is he uses an example, and I talked about this in our first presentation, of judges. And these were circuit court judges in New York who had years of experience, and literally their role is to judge. Their role is they're trained, and they are the best of the best in their field at doing it. And they compared the decisions of these judges based on their feelings, having seen the person, versus using simply and making a decision about them as to whether they're likely to commit a crime again, versus using a simple algorithm. And they found that time and time again, the algorithm outperformed the judges. So these people that are trained, educated to make decisions on people didn't do as well as an algorithm. So what he talked about, people tend to overestimate our gift at reading people really quickly. And we also have a situation where we're dealing with, for us, understand as independent business owners, this is our life's work. This is meaningful. We have to remember, for the employee we're getting ready to hire, this is a job. We have to make sure we see it in that perspective. Now, 4 steps in the selection process. And it's going to sound complicated. It's not. It's simple. But really, the first step you're going to do is you're going to have a pile of 100 or 200 candidates. How do we whittle that down to 10 or 20 and a manageable number? So we're going to talk about, this is what I think of as the exclusion phase. How do I eliminate the people that can't work so I can spend more time on the people that can? So the goal for this phase is to take some large number and make it into a manageable number that I can really get to know and then find value. Now, the second step is investigation. That is, now that I've got this list of 10 to 20 people, how do I find value? That's when I start to use some of my instincts to say, okay, there's something about this that I think could work. So how do I use that to be more inclusive? How do I use that to say, I want to find something outstanding and it's a particularly good fit of that? And that's where you're starting to do a lot more research and look for more insight into people. The third step is the interview process itself. And this is where you're really trying to get to know and you understand their fit versus your ideal candidate. So your goal really of any process, and it's not one, I'd want to find 1 to 2 people that you could hire for a given job. And lastly, and then in terms of the selection process, you want to make sure you're picking the right person and hiring the right candidate. So 4 steps in this process. You've got the candidates. Now what are you going to do? Now the first step is in the screening process. And I love this picture of drinking from, I think about drinking from a fire hose. There is absolutely no way that if you've got 200 candidates or even 100 candidates applying for a job, there is no way you're going to get to know all of them. You can't. It's impossible. There is no algorithm you're going to be able to use, despite people may try to tell you that. It really is still going to come down to evaluation. So one of the keys is going to be is you have to make the process manageable. You have to eliminate to some degree the candidates that just aren't going to work. And you really are looking in this phase to go from 100 to 10 or 20 or 200 to 10 or 20. You're looking for a reason to exclude them. And with that said, there's going to be a couple of different categories. And I'll explain this in a second in more detail. There's going to be kind of a general and then a more job-specific one. And then you're going to be able to, for most processes, and this really comes true for any search that I think I've ever done, where you're going to be able to do this relatively easily. Now, a couple of notes. One is you're going to be looking at a candidate for maybe a resume for maybe 5 seconds. That's it. You're going to make it a quick glance and saying this isn't going to write. And I'd also tell you, though, that if you find yourself spending a lot more time than that, include them. Go ahead. If you're not sure, why not? Add one more. It's not going to hurt. Now, really, there's 2 general categories. And when I say exclude people, and that probably comes off sounding differently. There's going to be, when you apply for the chairman of job for the chairman of General Motors, you're going to get the a greeter at Walmart that's going to apply for it. And there's absolutely nothing. I know people that have been greeters at Walmart, and it's a fine job, and it's a great organization, and a whole thing to do. But it's not remotely close to being connected to being the CEO of General Motors. So in that case, from a job-specific standpoint, you're going to be able to probably fairly easily look at things like the industry that they've worked in. You were in the restaurant business, and you get somebody that is a highly trained mechanic. Okay, they're not going to fit. That's just not the right industry, or they've worked in retail. So there's going to be industry dimensions that you're going to see that they're just not going to have the transferable skills for. There are certainly going to be basic skills. And what I mean by that is, let's say I need a job that's going to be interacting with the public a lot, but I'm hiring, but the person that applies has been in a data-driven role where they weren't interacting with the public. I would have some fairly serious concern about moving forward with something like that that's never had any real experience in doing that. And lastly, in terms of the level, you're going to be able to see that the level of person, I need somebody that's junior. And people will, let me clarify. People will tend to think I need somebody that's senior and the person's too junior. Could be just the opposite. I've got a junior position and I've got somebody that was a former VP that's applying for it. Either they don't understand what it is, or it's kind of hard to imagine they're going to be satisfied in a role like that. So really there's job-specific things you can go in and probably fairly easily use, and objective things you could look at to say this person's probably not going to be a good fit. Secondly, many cases, what I call more general things, location. You've got a job in Culpeper and they live in Philadelphia. I can't say there's never situations where that could work, but the odds of that being successful are almost zero. Secondly, you can tell by the resume a certain level of professionalism that they're going to have that may or may not fit what you're doing. And thirdly, things like job hopping. The person's had 5 jobs in the past 4 years. That's a pattern of behavior that, while I'm not saying that makes them a bad person, it would be hard-pressed. The basic premise for intelligence tests is the recognition of patterns. And if you can't see a pattern from that, that's a challenge. So there's going to be things that you're going to be able to look at quickly to take this list of 80 people, 100 people, let's say, and say, we're going to weed some of these out because they're just not going to be the right fit for me. You're making, as I said, broad conclusions in doing so. You're also probably, to a large degree, many of the people that are going to fit that are making what I'll call scattershot applications. I'm going to go on and apply for everything that I see on the internet or on this particular site. They haven't necessarily given any level of discernment to what they're applying for. And that's probably, so to a large degree, that's what you're going to see. And lastly, I will also tell you conversely, if you get somebody that's referred to you that maybe fits these things, I would still think long and hard about not giving them a pass to the next round. I would do it. Personally, if they've got a referral, unless they absolutely positively don't work, I usually move them on to the next round. So that could trump any one of the other things that you've seen on here. So step one is you're going to say, okay, I'm going to take this unmanageable list of 100 and get it down to 10 or 20 people, something that you can then get to work with. Now you're at the stage, step two is what I'll say investigate. So now I want to get to know, I've got 10 or 20 candidates, and I want to be able to take, as Malcolm Gladwell said, as broad a perspective on these folks as possible. I want to gather as much information on as I can. And at this point, I'm now different. I'm looking for a reason to include people, as opposed to before I want to whittle the number down. Now I'm looking for people. I've got this basket that I'm going to fill of people I'm going to interview. I'm looking for reasons to put them in there. So this is much more of an inclusive role. And one of the things that I would tell you is in doing this, I would involve, to the greatest degree possible, multiple people looking at this. Meaning if you've got, now that you've got it down to 10 or 20 folks, I would have a folder that I would give one or two other managers in your company and say, let's you and I create some tiers maybe of tier 1, 2, and 3 of who we think could fit this and compare notes. Because one of the things that's going to help broaden your perspective is by doing that, you're going to make sure that perhaps somebody that saw something that you didn't is going to have input into it. So it's a great exercise in this process, and from here on in, frankly, from doing this, to get multiple people involved and then calibrate your notes at some point. Come back and say, here's the 3 I talked to, and if they're not the same, let's discuss why, and do we want to include all of them or just some of them? And then lastly, I would also, in this process, I would place a much higher premium on actions that either they've taken in the past or today versus other aspects of their application. So somebody that's got a referral becomes a big part of this. Somebody that's demonstrated something outstanding, even if it's not directly related to you. Somebody that climbed a mountain or won an award at some point is valuable. As I said, I would also pay great attention to the way somebody got their resume to you. One of the things that I advise job seekers to do is that if you want to make an impression on somebody, get the name of the hiring manager, get their email address, and send it to them. Send your resume to them directly. So, or stop in and tell somebody that you want to do that. I place a lot of weight on how they got the resume to them, and most of the hiring managers I talk to feel the same way. And lastly, I think diversity is critically important. We have talked a lot about, in America, we've been talking a lot, and rightfully so, about social responsibility, and it's critically important for our success in our nation moving forward to be able to do that. So one is, I think there's a responsibility standpoint, but secondly, for companies, I think the more diverse a perspective and opinion or a perspective you can have, the better you're going to be. So somebody that can help add to, give you maybe a different way of thinking. Sometimes we have a tendency to hire people that think the way they do. Sometimes somebody that thinks differently is actually many times is a good idea. Now, in terms of this process, what I said is you're going to want to look for patterns of behavior. And this is a little bit more quantitative than the interview portion is, but there's some qualitative. And really what you want to do is the ways you can do that are, first of all, there is a lot more information on a resume, and I'm going to show you that on the next slide, that you can garner that's going to be real valuable in terms of, so I won't go through all these things specifically because I'm going to do it in detail later. But there's a lot of things, more things from a resume that you can glean that I think most people realize. You can also see how they communicate with you. Are they timely? Are they professional? Are they proactive? You could also take a look at public information now about that person, as well as in highlight. And as you go through, you're highlighting, as I said, the red and green flags, go and stop flags, and you want to see what kind of patterns they provide. Now, I shudder to think how many resumes I've looked at in the last 20 years, maybe 100,000. It's a huge number. And I think one of the things that you'll see is you can learn to find patterns in the ways and information somebody has, parts in their resume that somebody that hasn't done as much wouldn't see. So, for example, some of the things that you might look for, as I said, so how would you find out I've got certain specifications that I need? I've got an industry that I want somebody to come from. I want them to work in accounting. There's a specific set of skills. Well, the 3 best ways you find that are, one is you can just glance quickly at their title and companies and see a lot of that. So I can look at, glance quickly at the companies that somebody's worked at and get a pretty good picture in a second as to a lot of that information there. In addition, I can look at their degree, as well as a lot of people have on their resume something to do with a skill related or specific section there. So I can at a glance fill in a lot of holes in that picture on the specifications by glancing at those things. And I could probably do that in a couple of seconds. Now, the second thing that I can do, one of my favorite things to look at is progression. And that's really, it's just kind of starting at the beginning of their career down here at the bottom and working your way up to see what kind of progressions they made in their career. Are they moving upward? Do they appear to be going in increasing responsibilities? Are they staying about the same? Have they plateaued? Have they dropped? Are they getting promoted? Do they get, as one company promoted them? There's a lot of information you can garner from just looking at the progression of how somebody's moved their career, as well as with that, how long they spend in each company. So I can then glance at that, and as I read through those, I can not only get the sense of time, a sense of skills and specs, but I can also see how they progressed. Thirdly, you want to look for the scope of responsibility. So if I need somebody that's managed 50 people, for example, am I going to be able to find that? And that you're going to find really in the title they have, or probably in one of the first lines or first parts of the description on the resume. Once again, a ton of responsibility. So just because somebody's a director at company X could be a very different thing than a director at company Y. But still, as you're getting a sense for the scope of responsibility and the span of influence they had just by looking at those titles and some of that information on the resume. Fourth, I look for accomplishments. I want to see things on a resume that specifically speak to something that they did that was unique. I want somebody to tell me that they produced this much revenue, or saved this much money, or launched this many products, or had this attendance record, or saved their, whatever it is. I'm looking for specific accomplishments. If somebody doesn't have them on there, I question either whether they're capable of producing them, or B, whether they think it's important. So that's probably one of my favorite things to look at. And last but not least is understanding what I'm going to call motivational fit, or that's the gaps and transitions. When I go through somebody's background, when I interview them, I always ask for them to explain to me why they went from one company to another, particularly the last couple, and then obviously why they want to make the next transition that we're talking about. So a great piece of data to garner is, as I said, gaps and transitions. Were they out of work for a period of time? Have they not been out of work, but they've made several transitions in a short period? These these 5 areas here are a wealth of information you can get from looking at a resume that somebody may not have thought of before. They can really start filling in that piece of the puzzle for you. Now from there, as we're getting into the interviews themselves, the third step in this process, the first thing that I would advise somebody to do is to lay out the process that you think would work best for you. And as I want us, and I understand the goal. First of all, you want to get as broad a perspective as possible, meaning you want to know as much about the person, see as many different angles as you can. But none of us have enough time. So you need to be efficient with your time and be specific with how you measure it. And it can be done efficiently. So for example, the key to success is once again to have a process. I don't care how complicated your interview process is, and I tell recruiting clients this all the time, if I can describe it to somebody, I can manage it for you. It's the folks that don't, and many can't prescribe, well, if this interview goes well, what happens next? Well, we're not sure. Well, you can spend a few minutes. It's going to be much more efficient to spend some time up front and decide, here's the process we're going to follow. Now, secondly, I would suggest you have multiple people involved in the process, multiple steps, because every step is another data point, another set of flags you can measure, and multiple mediums, meaning I would use both phone, in person, and Zoom, or whatever format that you want to use in some combination or other if you can. And then last, what's important is the calibration. Everybody's got and it doesn't have to be super formal. There are formal, I'll show you a formal example of how you do it, but it can be informal. You need to come back when you're done and compare notes, say, what do we think, and rate them. So for example, let's say you're hiring people, and and the first step is you've identified 3 to 5 candidates. you want to then, at some point you've also established a process, and then set aside some blocks of time that you can do. I know I'm available Thursday afternoons and Tuesday mornings to interview, okay, that you can do it. And then you're going to reach out and contact candidates for availability. Now from there, really my suggestion would be that the first step is I would do a phone screen, have somebody in the organization do a phone screen. That could be 15, 20 minutes or even shorter, but somewhere you make contact, where you can start to gather some information on the person, but you can use that to help do some scheduling and confirmation of things. Okay, this is what the job's for. Do you understand that? Is that what you intended, et cetera? It's great. Here's what we're looking for. So to confirm that you're looking at the right things. And then from there, this is a place where you can start doing some research, where you can look at their social media profiles. You can think about references. You can start gauging and measuring behavior. I like doing this because one of the things I like to do is to see if somebody can keep an appointment. And you'd be amazed at how many people don't. There's going to be 10, 15% of the people that are going to eliminate themselves because they can't seem to make an appointment from one day to the next. So, but that's good data to have up front. So step one is that what I'm going to call initial exploration. Step two would then be, I would say, have the person interview with a couple of managers. And I might suggest somebody start off with a couple of phone interviews. And if you've got an hour, maybe you spend 30 minutes with one manager and 30 minutes with another. So you're going to do a couple of steps in the phone process. And then thirdly, the person comes in for a face-to-face interview and then does, either with the hiring manager or potentially a panel of people. I'm a big believer in panel interviews, to have 2 or 3 managers sitting in the room talking to somebody, and that's done live. Now, I lay this out for you, but this is an example of, first of all, an efficient process. There's lots of information here. You've got, in the green boxes here represent places where you're actually speaking and connecting to the person. So you've now got 4 different opportunities to garner specific feedback on that person's ability from any one of those items in the green box. And secondly, you're talking to multiple people, meaning that you're going to be able to come back and compare notes and calibrate your results at the end of this. In this whole process, I've got clients that do this. I don't think they collectively spend more than 3 hours on the process. So doesn't have to take time. I can also tell you, your ability to communicate this to a candidate is powerful, and it's going to bring more people into and through your system. I always tell candidates that the interview process is a window into the company's soul. So if you can manage this with respect and efficiency and purpose, I think that's definitely going to come across to candidates. So this is an example. Your company may other permutations and combinations of this, but this is a good prototype for how you could set it up. All right, now in terms of, we're going to get into the interview dimensions. And what that means is, what is it that's going to drive success? And in really one of our first meetings, we talked about, an exercise that I do with clients the first time that I work with them, is I will ask them to go through and imagine that we're sitting here a year or 2 later and we're toasting our success at finding the right candidate. And really what we've done is, I've asked them to tell me why. What is it, and this is when I first start the process, what is it about the person that you hired? What did they do that got them there? Job descriptions tend to be 2 pages long and things, and a laundry list of items. This is about, what are the couple of 2 or 3 things that they did that really made a big difference? And it's going to tend to look like, as I said, a business result you need. It's going to look like maybe they were able to start a new division, or they were able to control expenses, or they improved morale, or there's a specific project. And it's going to have words like, as I said, added, grew, controlled, etc. So you want to start with, we talked about starting with, what is it you need somebody to do? Now from there, that you've got these success dimensions, you've got a couple of options. One is you can either pray for the perfect candidate to just come across your door, or B, you can ask questions. This is important. You can ask questions that dive into those success dimensions. So and these dimensions are going to look something like, a certain technical skill that the person may have, their ability to prioritize, willingness to travel could be a big work. They have to work in teams. They're safety oriented or they're career motivated. You may pick, and it's going to look something like one of these things. You may pick 2 or 3 of these that you think are critically important, and it could be a larger list of things you could pick from. They're going to be important for your job. So, all right, let's say you have these 2 or 3 things. Now, really, behavioral interviews has been something that's been around for a while, but I think it's powerful. And really what they are is, what you were doing is, the premise of a behavioral interview is that past performance dictates future behavior. So what you're really getting at is, I don't want to hear so much what you would do in a situation like this, but you want to give them situations that are built around these success dimensions, and you want to get specific examples of things that they've done that demonstrate that. So for example, if let's say that time management and ability to prioritize was important, instead of asking, tell me, what would you do in a case like this? How would you handle it? You got conflicting priorities. So we've all had a situation where you get up one morning and on your desk, you've got 5 things that you need to do, and you've got time to do 2 of them. How do you pick the 2 that are the right ones to do? But what I don't want to ask somebody is, how would you handle this? You're going to get a lot of theory. What I want you to do is, behavioral interview would say, tell me about a time at work when you had 3 things to do and you only had time to get 1 of them done. And what you're looking for is a specific example from them of what they would do. And you're looking for something that was a positive result. You don't want somebody to say, well, I had that happen and I messed it up. You want somebody that's giving you a positive result. Fairly recent, and the definition of recent could be up to 10 years. But I mean, something that hasn't been, not as interesting things you did 30 years ago. It was more as maybe the past 10 years. And it's the STAR format. And that is, to explain that is, for behavioral interview responses, that would be, first of all, you want them then to break their answer, and you can even help them with this process if you want, or this nomenclature if you want, where they start with the situation or task that they were faced with. So in that example, last year I had a case where, one morning 3 things happened, yada, yada. You want to then tell you the action that they took and then the result of that action. So for example, a good example in a case like that, give you some good examples. You want to hear somebody say, last month, I was at work and that happened, and here's what I did, and it worked out well. I got everything done that I needed to. So it might be a specific versus, what I would do is I would first do this and that. You want to get somebody to give you a specific example. Once again, let's go back to it. You said that time management was one of the most important things for this role. You want to go back and ask them questions or examples of things they've done that demonstrated time management. It's pretty straightforward. So the action they took could be something like, well, here's what I did. I made a list of tasks that I had to do. I assessed the time it took me to do, the value of the company, et cetera, versus, them just telling you, not giving you any information, saying, here's what I do, and, here's what might come of it. So the result would be, you want to hear, I got done the 2 things that I really needed to, versus, we ended up having to do it over. So think about it that way. You're looking for success dimensions, specific examples, and you want to get the situation, action, and result. Other sources of data that you can use. I'm a big believer in assessing somebody's communication. How they get back to me. Are they professional? Can they make, answer in complete sentences? And how timely they are. That's a big one. I get a lot of information from this process on how quickly somebody gets back to me. Secondly, other places, the quality of the communication. Once again, are they professional? Are they good speakers? Can they convey information in the way you'd want them to? Certainly people who know them. Social media. Now that can be a controversial topic, and it's interesting. I, in 2010, remember asking students whether they thought it was appropriate for somebody interviewing them to look at their social media profiles. And at the time, when I first started in 2010, a lot of people were saying no. Today, they realize, yes, it's fine for people to look at your social media profile. And the thing that I pointed out to them at the beginning that they all now understand is that the first 3 letters of any website stand for World Wide Web. If you have posted on the internet, it's public information. And what I used to say to people was, when they debated it, well, if freedom of speech, I have the right to look at it like anybody else does. And so you shouldn't be able to tell me that I can't look at something you've posted for public consumption. With that said, I'm also not a big believer. When I'm looking up, I don't nitpick somebody's social media information. I absolutely do not. I'm not concerned if they're going to parties. I'm not concerned if they're doing silly things. I don't care about that. But there are it can certainly help fill in pieces of somebody's puzzle. If they're always dour, that could give you a piece of data. Once again, that's not something I would hire somebody based on or not, but it certainly helps fill in a piece of this puzzle. So I would use it to fill in things about a person as opposed to make a decision on them. And also would strongly urge you that if you know people that know them, call them, talk to them about it. This is also another topic too that I get asked about a lot, and that is testing and profiles. And I am a huge believer in the value and benefit from utilizing testing and profiles. I am not a believer in making them a pass-fail. I have seen in 30 years of doing this, I have seen no data that shows me that using this system as a pass-fail improves turnover or hiring results. I've never seen that. But I do know that they can be a very valuable tool. First of all, the best way to describe it is, as Jeff mentioned up front, I'm certified Myers-Briggs. To me, having a Myers-Briggs profile of somebody is like having another highly trusted and intelligent colleague that is not directly related to what you do. Talk to the person and give you their honest perspective. An insightful colleague. So it's like getting one more picture of this person, not to base your, make it pass fail, but it's like having somebody that you really respect tell you a little bit about how they think. So yes, I think that can be a great tool and used properly. You can also, things like Myers-Briggs are great once the person's come on board, because it's going to tell you how they think and how they're going to communicate with other parts of your group. So once again, another great source of information. Well, last but not least, the selection process, the last step in the process here. So you've got it, you've got one or two candidates, it's bringing the right one on board. Really the big part of this is team calibration. You all need to sit down and talk about how you do that, how you make that final selection, and make sure that you're ranking people in whatever format that you think is appropriate, but you're ranking performance so you can compare notes. Once again, this is how you're going to find that value, is by comparing notes, because if 3 people are going to see more than one person's going to. So it's having a process by which, and it doesn't have to be complicated, but we're all going to sit down at the end and talk about it. It was also getting the feedback from that profile. As I said, that's like having somebody else, somebody that you don't have to spend time managing, by the way, talk to them as well. Another thing at this point that I think is enormous, and over the years that I've seen it makes a difference in how the person starts, is their level of interest. One of the things I ask people before they get their final job offer is, if you had to evaluate this on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 highest, what would you give it? And I'm looking for as high a number as possible. And that momentum will carry into them starting with the company. So I think that's a huge part of the process, and it really is for whom what it comes down to. If I get to a tiebreaker, I start to evaluate for whom is this the bigger opportunity. You can have 2 people that are equal. If for one person it's a lateral and another it's a step up, I'm going with the person that's a step up for. Reference, the other thing to finish up is references and background checks. People say if I ask you for references, you're going to give me people that like you, and that's fine. You'd be surprised over the years at the amount of information, however, I can get from a reference. I've called references and people have said, I don't know why they put me down there. I don't think I'm a good reference for them. That's an important piece of data. Sometimes you can tell by questions they don't want to answer, or certain things. And I use a fairly standard and easy question template that I use for that. But I would, once again, as many pieces of this as possible, I would definitely take that step. And lastly, background checks. I'm still sometimes alarmed in this day and age at the number of companies that don't do that. And it's a simple thing. Checking a quick, criminal record and driving record can a lot of times can save you a lot of angst and anxiety. So I think those are important boxes to make sure that you check before you make your decision. Now, in terms of how this data integration works, this is a company I did a formal process for, where they would fill in the name of the candidate. They'd have 3 people that interview them. So everybody would put their, each column here has a different interviewer, and they'd put scores for each of the dimensions. We created success dimensions like I described for them. And then they had to say what next step they were recommending. So you can do it formally like this, or you can do it more info, just having a conversation. Hey, who was everybody's top candidate or 2 candidates? Now, a couple of ideas I'll throw at you here. As I said, write down whatever process you're going to follow for anything, write it down. You'd be amazed. when you do that, how much more efficient you will get with the process. You will also be able to, doesn't mean you can't modify. You can modify it as many times you want, but the more you'll be able to communicate it, the better you'll be able to manage it. Multiple people on the interview team. I would also do, I like the combination. I've had candidates say, or clients say, what do you recommend? I do both phone and in person. I want to get, and I'd start with phone, because when I do it in person, you're going to get a lot of visual cues that may not have any value to your decision. That could be positive or negative. I mean, it doesn't make any difference. You want to hear up front. It's like somebody that's lost one of their senses. I found that by using that phone contact, it makes me focus on other things that I think are very important. So if I do meet them, I can now combine it with that. But I always like to say, start with phone and kind of really be able to focus on what you're looking for. One question that I will give everybody that does not necessarily fit that exactly that template, that behavioral interviewing template, but I like that I always ask. And I ask somebody to say that, ask them to imagine that they're leaving their current job and that I'm the person that's going to take their place. And for some reason, they've got a vested interest in my success. Maybe they're going to get a bonus or commission off of what I do, but they've only got a half an hour to talk to me. They're going to say, all right, here are the 2 or 3 fundamental things that you need to do to be successful in this job that will make us both money, and get them to list them for you. I found that to be a very powerful way to understand whether the person got it or didn't in their last job. Once again, I don't go entirely by that at all, but that certainly is a question I ask consistently that I think is helpful. Panel interviews, get 2 or 3 people to save time for the candidate and for you guys. Have 2 or 3 people at a time, particularly, as I said, lines blurring. We talked about trends, lines blurring. Do it via Zoom, that's fine too. But getting 2 or 3 people at one time to talk to somebody, I think can be powerful. Make sure that you're finding people and references you can talk to. We talked about testing and do those reference and background checks. So to summarize, 4 steps in the process that we went through. You're looking for patterns of behavior to fill them in. I would have multiple steps, people and steps involved in the interview process. Behavioral interviews, I think, are a great way to as best you can determine how well they're going to execute against those success dimensions. I want you to understand their motivation of why this job is an opportunity for them. Don't miss those steps. And with that said, Jeff and Amy, any questions? I'm done with my slides here. Any questions I can answer for you guys, or any thoughts on that?
I'm just curious, from this new reality that we are in, and we are talking about Zoom, and we're talking about interviewing, how difficult is it when you're doing interviews, from your experience, when you're doing phone interviews or you're doing video interviews, how difficult is it to kind of, some of those metrics that you were talking about, is it to be able to evaluate those compared to your normal face-to-face interview?
That's a great question, Jeff. And I would say that first of all, it's a different role. I don't think Zoom is as good as in person, because I think you do miss certain cues or things or body language that might help you. But I think it's pretty darn close. I really do. It's pretty darn close to filling a lot of that in. But I also think it's important to combine things. As I said, I find tremendous value at not seeing the people the first time I talk to them, at least, and just having to listen to them. As I said, the people that unfortunately have lost a sense, we'll talk about their others become heightened. So I think it's a great cue for you to listen to the way things, what you're hearing, and then compare when you see somebody to what you're seeing. So I think, to answer your question, I think Zoom is pretty darn close. I think it's a great way. I don't know that if I had the ability, I would want to make a final decision until I had met somebody face to face. But I've got clients that are doing that very thing now because of the reality that we're in. And so far, it's worked fine. And, we've done it a couple of times, but it's worked fine. So if it's me, if I had the choice, I'd want to at least meet them once face to face. I think Zoom is pretty darn close.
Do you see the Zoom and the phone calls becoming more prevalent now going forward? That this, as you've said, it's worked. That somebody's interviewed a couple people. They've only done it through Zoom. Do you see that being integrated more now, knowing what we know?
Absolutely, yes. I think, once again, I think, and Skype has been around for a long time, and I very rarely used it. I can't say that I never did, but I very rarely used it. I think the technology today, and I don't have stock in Zoom, I wish I did, but is easier. It's less cumbersome to use. I don't have to download lots of information. I don't have to manage my activity on the site. It's pretty easy for you and I. You and I don't necessarily have to have software downloaded to a large degree to use Zoom. So for one thing, I think the technology has improved. And second thing is, this has forced us, and you and Amy and I started talking about this, that this has forced us to use this electronic, this electronic medium, and we're seeing it's pretty darn good. So we've all gotten to be a lot better at it than we were 6 months ago, much better at it than we were 6 months ago. We see I've got clients that this is pretty darn good. So will it replace it? No, but the lines are going to blur. You're going to get more of this, which is good because that means that that means you're not going to have to travel as much. You're going to be able to get more done. If I can do it, one of the advantages of Zoom or electronic is time. I don't have to travel. If I've got an interview in DC, I don't have to drive in there. I can go change my clothes and come in and have my interview. So very efficient on time. So a lot of these things that we talked about to be able to integrate and get multiple data points are becoming easier. It's incidental, but it relates to this. For example, one of the things that I've seen in teaching at Germanna is I love doing group projects or where the students get together in a group and have to talk about things. The only challenge you have with this, I teach a lot of hybrid classes, which is I get an hour and 20 minutes a week with them, period. That's what I get. I have to guard my time jealously, because even if it takes 5 minutes for them to get up, 5 to 7 minutes to get up and make a change, that's 5% of the time in the class. What do I do? So I can't use up time on logistics. With Zoom, I can do it like that. I click a button and they're now in a group within 3 seconds, and it does it randomly, it does it automatically. So in many ways, and I've said this to people, the ability to do group discussions is equal or better on Zoom than it is live. Mm-hmm. You miss some of the cues live, but because of the time. So I think there's a lot of things about it. It's going to be easier and faster. We can do a lot more talking to one another if we're doing it this way.
When you're talking about those breakout rooms, that makes me think of something I've been seeing a little bit more in online job fairs. That's a way to use breakout rooms and get people an opportunity to interact. Are you seeing more of that?
Yes, I see it all the time. In fact, one of the things, because I get emails from it, and it was funny, I had a project that I was doing for a client where we had job fairs scheduled in March that all got canceled. And they didn't get canceled something. Remember, March was when everything was going down. So I literally had they had job fairs that were planned I found out that 3 days before they said, yes, it's still on. And then the day before they said, no, it's not. And so it was just as it was shutting down. And even then they had the technology for doing it. I've seen it. It was still somewhat cumbersome. And it wasn't the technology, we weren't as comfortable, or the schools were at the time. And I wasn't the school in that context. I was one of the companies that was interviewing, but we weren't getting used to it. I see that a lot now. I see a lot of job fair. Every couple of days, I see somebody talking about a virtual job fair. Yes. And you can do, once again, if I don't have to drive to someplace else, I can do a lot more of those. The company can reach a lot more people, and the candidate can go to a lot more of those and talk to more folks if they can do it that way. Now, is it as good as in person? No, but it's close. And I think
it's a win-win.
I think some of the efficiency can help offset a lot of the differences in productivity. So yeah, I do see a lot more of those.
Awesome. Well, Neil, thank you once again for joining us on our town hall and hiring and interviewing, brought to you today by the Culpeper Star Exponent and our Small Business Development Council. So Neil, once again, thank you so much for helping us out, chatting and educating us about hiring and interviewing. We certainly appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
We'll
Neil.
talk to you soon. Thank you, everybody.